For many folks, I think AI is a buzzword. It can sometimes feel like a silver bullet. Today, my esteemed panel will be kind of sharing more about their perspectives on AI, on its promise in medicine. We're not going to get too much into the technical aspects of AI, but certainly we'll hopefully answer some questions about the intersection of AI, the promise that it holds, the applications that we see today. As Dina shared, my name is Jess Richter. I lead the CRO and consulting services team at Veranex. I'm going to have my esteemed panel go and introduce themselves, but I think you'll understand in just a few short minutes why they've been invited to participate on today's panel and tremendous insights that they share from very diverse perspectives. So please go down the line, introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, as well as the framework of how you think of AI, just so we can understand your thinking.
Sure. So hello, everyone. Hopefully everyone is not asleep after dessert. I'm Beth Andrews, and I'm the Chief Digital Health Officer at Dell Technologies. I also lead business development for life sciences and healthcare. So Dell has very deep roots in supporting with infrastructure, research. We support device companies. We support AI workloads, drug discovery. So we're a company that provides compute, storage, multi-cloud, the whole spectrum of technology. And we work really closely with many different partners on solutions. My background prior to Dell is I've spent a lot of time as an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur. I've worked at a bunch of startup companies. I think, worked in the wearable sensor space back in 2008. So that, planning for digital health before we even called it digital health, we were calling it mHealth. Or healthcare IT. So if you think of the wearable market, since this is a MedTech conference, I came up with Statista numbers from 2012 that were 750 million. And I think in 2030, we're looking at projections from Grandview of 168 billion. So last year, I think, was in the 25 billion. So we've really scaled these technologies. And I guess one comment I'll make there is back when we were designing that product, we were looking at aging population and chronic disease. We weren't anticipating a global pandemic, the consumerism where we would get healthcare from a tech company. And we certainly weren't, while AI is not new, we certainly were not thinking about Gen AI, right? So really excited to be here. My background as well is also working closely on the entrepreneur side in the four walls of a hospital, wearing scrubs, deploying a lot of remote patient monitoring solutions. So I have a lot of device and solution experience in the AI space. And what is AI to me? I kind of want to flip that and just say, you know what? I'm looking at identifying the problems and priorities, and what is it that we need to bring to the table to solve those, to create outcomes? So I don't look at AI for AI's sake. I look at the tools that we have, and there's definite, really great opportunities to provide better care, hopefully to alleviate the physician burnout and also to help patients.
Hello. Yeah, hi. My name is Cheng. I am a neurologist here at UCLA, and I'm the Chief Medical Informatics Officer. Fancy term to say I am the medical advisor to the Chief Information Officer at UCLA Health. My background is really not in informatics. I'm a health services researcher and just moved into informatics because I thought that was the kind of area of growth within health services research. And I sit in a lot of AI committees and councils at UCLA Health. We asked the question of what I think of AI, how I define AI. On the one hand, I think of AI as just the next more advanced mathematical models that we've used in healthcare for years. And all of our familiar metrics that we use to evaluate it, we can use it for AI. On the other hand, generative AI is truly, I think, something different that we can't use our former tools to evaluate its effectiveness, and something that really is, I guess, heavily desired by many people within the School of Medicine, and we're struggling about how to evaluate use cases and as well as their effectiveness.
I'm Kwame Ulmer. I'm fortunate enough to play two roles that are relevant here. I serve as a venture partner at Waymaker 360 Health. It's a 2 in 20 healthcare fund that invests in MedTech, digital health, and diagnostic solutions. We've made about 50 investments over the last 5 years, and many of them have been in digital health. I also serve as a managing partner of MedTech Impact Partners. We're a medical device regulatory strategy firm. We've worked with about 50 companies over the last 6 years. We're going to work with 50 more. And a couple dozen of them have been digital health solutions. So we've worked with them to help them navigate the FDA. And when I think about AI, I think of it in two ways: as an approach that can help drive outcomes more quickly. And I'll give a very specific example of a company we invested in that has AI-powered software on their roadmap, and then accelerate solutions becoming standard of care. And again, it just ties to, it's an approach that can help reach more patients more quickly through those two means. And I can't wait for the conversation, Jessica.
Do you guys see what I mean when I talk about the panel, right? So we have the perspectives really uniquely of different key stakeholders. And actually, I want to open up our conversation, and that's what this is going to be more so than a panel. And Beth, I'll start with you. Just in regard to what you said, I really liked, I'm not going to necessarily have a define around AI, but what's the problem that we're trying to solve and how do you right fit that solution? So can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, you can look at that as build versus buy, because there's lots of ways to achieve the goal and different approaches. So I think you need to always evaluate what is the problem you're solving, what is that right tool, all of the sort of traditional, even in developing the product, the traditional market assessments, looking at, the ROI, right? You could have the greatest solution, but if it's not going to drive that ROI. So something that might be a clinical solution using Gen AI, you may have a solution that is right fit and that's cost effective. Or, it might be something that really is probably an analytics tool that maybe might be better used in life sciences for drug discovery. So it's important to really understand the solution. I'll give an example. We work with a company in computer vision called Artisight. And so they deploy solutions around virtual nursing, telesitting, using AI and computer vision. And so if you're looking at that type of solution, you might want to work with a company like that that's built a model, that's deployed it, and come in. And, you're not going to maybe be surprised with a 50 or 60% accuracy. They bring in the model, they deploy it, they test it. And, the goal is to get as close to 100%. So, but doing that local training, but having something that's been deployed and achieved outcomes versus maybe something off the shelf. I love open source. We all do. But you may be surprised when you bring something in to have a team that can develop that and can maintain it. So right fitting a solution is, really important. And it may just be understanding the tools you have.
So speaking of tools, and as an end user of some of these tools, Dr. Cheng, I'm actually curious your perspective on, either barriers to adoption, or maybe we can start with what have you seen adopted at UCLA? And for you and your colleagues, what has either increased that willingness to adopt or maybe created some hesitation?
Yeah. I think each health system is not always ready to accept each type of tool. I'll mention a few AI tools that we have implemented at UCLA. So we have a risk model that predicts high risk of readmission for patients who are discharged from the hospital. But that model, deployment of that only made sense once we had hired a small army of care coordinators who could look at the model and act upon it. So we have also in a hospital, there's a model which predicts high risk of clinical deterioration or sepsis. Again, that only made sense once we had a clinical deterioration team that can look at it and potentially intervene or contact someone about it. Now, the issues of sepsis and readmission are, they're just as true in 2014 as they are in 2024. But if we were to implement those models back then, it wouldn't be as effective, because at the end of the day, the AI is supposed to help someone. And if you don't have that someone identified, you're not leveraging it the way it could maximally can do so.
So recognizing that with a lot of these technologies, and you both have mentioned some products that may be regulated by FDA, other products that may not be, that actually might just be improvements in efficiency within the healthcare system. Kwame, I'm actually going to have you wear both hats simultaneously, regulatory as well as your venture hat, as you think about your willingness to invest in a company that comes to you with an AI-enabled technology. How much does that regulatory maze or framework go into that decision as far as do you invest or not, or what's that pathway look like?
So I would say the story that is most compelling for us, or that de-risks the opportunity, goes something like this. We have a prescription digital therapeutic that we may be able to get on the market earlier as a wellness device to drive revenue. When we add these, you know all about this, Jessica, claims, we think it'll be upregulated. It may be de novo, and we're going to have a moat of 1,000 patient study to validate that. And we'll be able to get additional reimbursement because it got breakthrough designation, and it was one of the 5 that was selected if TCIT goes through. So there's a progression of milestones that increase the value of the opportunity. And what we've seen play out, and then I'll pause, is for companies like Carlsmed, which is a spinal device company, a precision spinal device company that 3D prints spinal implants, their first 510K was not AI powered. I think their third 510K was. So they increased value with the AI solution. And their whole premise is they're going to eventually be able to have a lower revision rate because of this software that provides precision spinal implants. It's the same thing with a MedTech Innovator winner, Stratos, from a few years back. Their first 510K was not AI powered, but their third 510K, I believe, was AI powered.
So noticing a trend with regard to key stakeholders, identifying the unmet need, identifying from a user perspective how it will be adopted, identifying, and Kwame had mentioned several different programs that FDA has in place, but a receptivity by the agency. So there does feel like there's a market readiness for adoption of AI, just making sure that you are fit for purpose with regard to what you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and can I just jump in too? Also, we've seen things evolve, like virtual nursing is a thing now. The ITIC, I believe, a consulting group said that there's 34% increase in virtual nursing programs. There's actually a credential. The Academy of Med-Surg Nurses has a credential now for virtual nursing. So that's been really effective to provide care, to take a lot of tasks off of the nursing staff that can be done virtually. And actually, I think patients really like that, and they like interaction if they're able to do that, or education with somebody who can spend the time.
It's a great point, because I feel like when you can solve what patients need as far as education, that doesn't require as robust necessarily a tool set or a regulatory paradigm, but could really be a huge area of need. Dr. Cheng, did you have something to add?
No, just thinking of some other use cases of what we've implemented at UCLA. So it's no different elsewhere. There are a lot of radiology products or imaging interpretation products, and I think that makes sense because a lot of the use case in that instance is to help the radiologists prioritize which scan to interpret, but they will still interpret all of them. So it's not like you're going to omit a scan because the AI told you something. Whereas a bunch of other tools that I mentioned, like high risk of readmission, you really are selecting a subgroup of people to identify. You're not going to call your entire patient panel, like millions of patients. You really are going to. So the implications there, I feel, are a lot bigger because it's a difference between someone getting something versus somebody not. Whereas maybe for some other instances where you're just simply prioritizing the order, you have another one prioritizing like which in-basket messages in primary care should be a higher priority than the other, but someone's expected to go through all of them.
And if we follow the regulatory clearances and approvals, over 80% of all devices that have AI are in that radiology space, second to then cardiology, neurology, and then it sort of trails off from there. So certainly lots more blue oceans of opportunity in different specialties, but I think radiology has been well explored. I'm curious, and this question I'll direct to you, Kwame, but invite others to answer as well. As we integrate more of these types of technologies within our healthcare systems, I know cybersecurity, is a major concern. More and more, and we've seen in the headlines, cyber attacks, lots of scrutiny from IT systems, hospital, IT networks, security there. So what should manufacturers or any of the startups in the room consider to ensure compliance early in the development process?
So we're working with a firm, happened to be based in South Korea, and they got, and Jessica, this is probably no surprise, probably about somewhere around 10 cybersecurity questions with their 510K. So that's job security for cybersecurity experts. And then they asked me to source someone who had experience in resolving cybersecurity questions from the FDA. So to answer your question, Jessica, when you're building that risk management plan, get a cybersecurity expert on board early. And they will have a depth of understanding of the types of reports that the FDA needs to see early. So that's really the one key proposal I would say for startups. The last thing I'll say is this is not a new issue, but we know that the FDA has resourced the organization with people who have the expertise to ask specific cybersecurity questions. I like to mention that 10 years ago, Vice President Dick Cheney had his defibrillator hacked. So cybersecurity is not a new issue, but now the FDA is focused on it, and every SAMD or SIMD company will have to consider it.
Yeah, I'll just comment on cybersecurity because it really is probably not, even though it's talked about a lot, it's probably not even talked about enough, even in AI. So, at UCLA, we spend all this time trying to protect our data or, trying to make sure there's no intrusions. And then we work with a vendor who wants to implement some AI model, and they want our data for help train a model. And because they can't tell us what's in it, they want all of our data, like all the time. And so the implication is our data is like replicated in all these clouds somewhere. So what's the use in protecting all of our data if it's like elsewhere in places that we don't know where it is? So we have to, there's questions about where the data is and how it's stored and making sure it's protected. It becomes just as important, the emphasis or attention placed on that is just as important as protecting the data of where it's kind of originally stored.
Yeah, and I think, on that point too, we're starting to hear even more on federated learning, confidential compute, other ways where you can compute on data without the data leaving the environment. But yeah, people want data and understand probably the ask.
And to that end, I think where we can leverage AI to reduce costs, to improve efficiency, I'm curious, Beth, if you can think of some examples where you've seen that effectively, or conversely, companies that maybe have tried to do that and struggled.
Sure. So you might have seen, there's been a bunch of articles, but Becker's article on the Guthrie Health System, they're a rural health system in southern New York State and northern Pennsylvania. And so coming out of COVID, really challenged with the nursing shortage. So we helped them bring in a couple solutions, a company called Medical Informatics Corp, to be able to deploy remote monitoring from every bed. And they have time series waveforms. They connect to all devices. I've spent a lot of time in that space and know a lot of the problems. So we were really able to, that company was able to help them be able to monitor patients anywhere, to provide intensivist care remotely, so that they can make the right decisions on whether patients stay where they are or maybe move to a higher acuity bed in their large main campus. So we also, Artisite came in and deployed there, and they were able to save $7 million on labor costs, being able to cover every bed for telesitting. The clinician and leader there won the Chime Innovation Award. They won ECRI awards. So I think that's a really great case study on, what are the problems and how do you deploy these solutions? The first one I mentioned, and I think this goes along with what you said, Kwame, about solutions that don't require FDA or solutions that might be cleared, but then have other use cases down the line. So the remote patient monitoring software was cleared, but it was deployed in a way where now you can just flip the switch if you want to use it for AI. You have now, within 25 milliseconds, you have all that data and all the waveforms. So there's been a lot of research done at different hospitals using this solution, and now they're applying for FDA for early warning. And there's been just in the research, huge, for single ventricle babies, being able to get 2 hours early warning. And again, these are in research papers, but things that now you can take and get approval, and those can ride on this platform. So I think it's important also when we're right fitting. There's times when a point solution is absolutely, the best choice, but also look at platforms and what the opportunity is right now and what's their roadmap. Are you going to be able to achieve your goals using that, or do you have to bring in more and more solutions, which I know, Eric, then you have to figure out that piece of it.
Well, and to that end, I think that the turning off and the turning on and the ability to leverage data, some of the questions that we often see from end users, certainly from FDA, from healthcare systems is, where are you getting this data set? And transparency and bias with that data set. So Dr. Cheng, I'm actually curious, I'll direct this to you. Because of sometimes the feeling of that black box nature when it comes to training these data sets and the need for these data, how can companies either gain access to that data or provide end users with more assurance of how those data sets are being trained, so that especially those impacting clinical decision making?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. I know there's several frameworks out there. I think there's a recent one which laid out kind of the questions that everyone should be asking about AI, and part of it is related to bias, like what are the samples it's been trained on, what are the, let's say, how do you use race and ethnicity and other vulnerable characteristics. And I think that's all necessary. And to be honest, in our Health AI Council, a lot of the questions are those methodologic, mathematical questions. But I do have to say that as much as important as those are, and I think it's really statisticians maybe are best able to handle them, there is also the aspects of how you deploy them. And the example I like to use is there are many models that predict risk of no-show to a clinic. And there's people debate over what patient characteristics you should use or not use to be considered fair. But let's suppose we've all agreed upon a fair model for a no-show in clinic. One could use it in a way to, let's say, identify patients who are high risk for a no-show, run it the night before, contact patients who are at high risk and say, do you have a transportation need? Do you have other things to help you lower the chance of being a no-show in clinic? Or a health system can run the exact same model and say, this patient's not likely to show up. We're going to double book in that slot. Reduce, make sure we have financial, maximize our financial revenue. But that means that if the patient does show, they're at risk of getting less care because there's somebody also booked at the same time. It's the exact same model mathematically, but I think in one case, one can argue that it is, a preferable or desirable outcome, and one's more questionable.
I think that's a really helpful example. And in that instance, a hospital administrator could argue for either, right? Or potentially even both, depending upon those outcomes. Beth, I'm curious as far as speed to triage to diagnose, implications for improved accuracy and outcomes. What have you seen as far as either at Dell or for some of the partners that you work with?
Yeah, but we're really excited at Dell. I mean, we're an infrastructure company, right? But we actually are working on a solution with Digital Human. And so the Gartner projections too for that market are to grow to $125 billion by 2035. So I think we're going to see more digital humans avatars than just an avatar, or definitely a chatbot. So the applications there are kind of endless. Right now it's deployed in the city of Amarillo, not in a healthcare use case, but to communicate for emergency services over 60 languages, have interaction. I think personally, on a personal health journey, where I'm really excited about AI is speed to diagnosis. I think if you're looking at rare or difficult diseases, I'm a long COVID patient, so we have evolving information daily. I would love to see, I think the average diagnosis time is, 5 to 8 years for a rare disease, but rare isn't rare when you take them all together. And also when you look at personalized medicine. So I'd like to see AI's impact there to really cut down on that time and to help clinicians. Most patients that come in don't fall in that category. So I do think there sometimes can be a little bit of bias that delays. So I almost, again, flip the model, and can we use the power of AI to arrive at a diagnosis much faster?
Well, and to that point, I think the interesting part as you look at case studies and you look at clinical data and you look at literature around the globe, it's very difficult across many languages to capture that. Kwame, I'm curious as we think about AI's application in MedTech globally, what you think are maybe some of the exciting things on the horizon or some of the limitations.
So we're completing some research on where the companies that get the 3,000 to 4,000 510Ks cleared come from. And surprise, surprise, most of them are based in the US. But after that, it's China and South Korea. And the opportunity is to get your clearance in Korea or China and enter into a partnership to obviously go to the second wave, the US. That's one. So that's a global issue. And then use the data that you maybe have collected in your local population to use it as a jumping off point to maybe apply for a breakthrough designation in the US. So those are some immediate thoughts of companies that maybe are based out of the United States that want to launch in the US.
To that end, with your investor hat on now, when companies are pitching to you, do you celebrate, cringe, or have any reaction when you just hear AI? Is it something that's overutilized, or do you think it's...
What I've experienced is it's an obligatory statement in most pitch decks, but the way it actually plays out is the first product to market is not AI powered. And the company is clear-eyed and they just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, it was harder than we thought. We had to tell the FDA how we trained the model. Then we had to have geographic diversity and ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And we got a boatload of questions from the FDA. So it's going to take another 12 months. But it's fine because we kind of knew, right? Like we budget for all of that. And that's the way I think of it. It's almost, what was that other thing? Bitcoin, right? In some ways, it's a new Bitcoin. It's obligatory, but we've seen enough of these to know roughly how it's going to play out in terms of the real timeline.
Yeah, it's funny. In our procurement cycle, there's a checkbox if something is considered uses AI, but becomes useless when every single, thing of purchase claims some sort of AI like somewhere in it. So like what isn't going to be AI at some point?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we're focusing on AI instead of the data. And you could argue you need the data for the AI or the analytics, but what is the quality of the data? Because we can have AI applications all day, but if it's, not good data, then garbage in, garbage out. So how do you obtain your data? What's in your data? How do you curate that data? How do you process that data? If it's in a lab, for example. And I think sometimes if we just look at efficiencies around managing data and different tools that aren't necessarily AI, I think data management is important. It's important for AI, but and data is growing hugely. So especially in healthcare. So
maybe there's an AI solution for that. Yeah. So we left some time intentionally to turn it over to the audience for questions. I know this is an incredible panel of experts, and so we do want to encourage if anyone wants to pop up to the mic or raise your hand. If not, I can keep going, but I want to give everyone else a chance.
Hi, guys. Thanks for your panel discussion. Can you talk about the data and AI and how what you put into it has to be accurate, obviously, if you want to get out something that's going to be useful in a clinical setting. Can you talk about, how to like safeguards and how to check on data to make sure that it's accurate and useful?
Can you clarify what type of data are you thinking about?
It could be data from like patient data. For example, let's say a new patient comes into an office and, as a baseline, you want to have every patient is different. So every patient has different medical conditions. Mm-hmm. So that's your starting point. And then the AI is just one tool that you use to come up with a treatment plan. So maybe you can talk about, how useful that is in the overall treatment.
Yeah, I'll start. I think I'm going to echo what Beth said earlier. It would be great if, and there are companies out there, the AI to summarize, let's say, the medical record to do something very succinct for people to read. But like other places, our medical record, I'm the CMIO, I can say this, there's a lot of, copy and paste and because of that inaccurate or outdated data that no AI program can really kind of distinguish. There's really needs to be some cleanup with some of that data. Otherwise, you're using erroneous data to maybe help train something because a condition is lasting longer than it really is, or medications are lasting, being in a note longer than it's actually given.
Yeah, and I think there's solution providers too. Again, it depends on the application, but I'm thinking we work with HealthPoint Solutions. They have a platform where they can provide kind of cognitive AI across clinical, operational, financial use cases in an organization. So, they'll go in and they can kind of clean up that data, or they can take the different sources of data within your organization if that needs to be pulled together. So, short of kind of doing more sophisticated with, data scientists, et cetera, I think, that is an important part of the process.
I'll give a basic example. Like the most basic data in a patient demographic chart is, let's say, race and ethnicity. That's one of, besides maybe age and sex. We have accumulated data over decades. We imported data from prior to our current EHR and such. And we know that there's a bunch of that data is observer reported instead of patient self-reported, which is the gold standard of how it should be reported now. So we were reluctant to do a lot of kind of analyses or kind of based on that until we were assured that it was self-reported data. And so we had to, this is during the pandemic when we weren't 100% sure of, what people, they were either other or we weren't sure whether they were self-reported. We had to survey hundreds of thousands of people to make sure that what is listed in their medical record is actually what they believed it to be. There's a story of our health equity diversity officer. Her father was she's African American. Her father's African American, and she found out from medical record he was labeled as white because he's happened to be light skinned, and just shows that the observer reported and obviously never asked. You can't use that type of data in models, and that's one of the most basic data that one would want to use in any algorithm.
Yeah, and one other thing came to mind. You can have millions of patient records and look at that data, and that data maybe at UCLA. If you're going to train algorithms on it, what happens when you go to another health system, whether it's similar or quite different? You may have very different outcomes. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about how generalizable is the data if you train an algorithm on that. And Kwame, you probably, come in contact with that, especially with companies that might be doing AI for medical devices, right? And it's large numbers. You could have 10 million patient records, but still maybe that isn't going to work, even in a similar type demographic health system. So,
yeah, the issue of confounding variables, comorbidities come up a lot, so that you can have a sense that the data is rich enough and robust enough to be representative of the intended population in the future. Absolutely.
And that's really key as companies think about commercializing globally, because, if you're in Korea, that may not be representative, likely not, of the US patient population or of, primarily the EU patient population. Likewise, in the US, it may be underrepresented of other populations. So really important that the data sets that you have, I would say, represent the populations you intend to serve, and that evolves over time.
And clinical trial data, right? Clinical trial data may not be as diverse as we want it to be. So,
and FDA does have some really strong initiatives around that, but then going back to how the data was trained and being able to demonstrate that.
Hello, Moses Cesario with Butterfly Biosciences. My question is around the distinction between generative AI and machine learning, specifically for application in diagnostics. Generative AI is self-learning and can generate unexplainable results versus machine learning. And do we have any examples out there today of approved diagnostics that are using Gen AI?
The ones that I think of, they used AI ML and it was not generative. There's iterative health. They used to be called iterative scopes. It looks at lesions in the colon. I'm almost certain that they are AI powered. There's a company right up the road in good old Woodland Hills, iNook, that got validated over 1,000 eyes that aids in the diagnosis of diabetic retinopathy. There's a company, Sensei, that looks at eye motion. And I believe one of the sites that they're studying their device in, it looks at eye motion to aid in the diagnosis of PTSD. But every example I'm thinking of, none of them are generative AI.
I can't think of any. The most common, the two use cases for generative AI that I'm aware of for at least frontline clinicians are to be able to summarize a conversation of a patient and generate a note, or being able to kind of analyze the medical record and create a summary. And those things are hard to evaluate. I mean, there's no like yes, no outcome you're looking for. It's like, is the note good or not? It's more qualitative metrics to figure out how to judge one vendor to be better than another. It's a challenge.
It's also difficult from a regulatory perspective. If we're focusing on the US market, FDA has a requirement or kind of a mandate to bring products to market that have reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. When you have generative AI, design control comes up. I mean, lots of issues arise with regard to how do you have a reasonable assurance, right? And so that's where we see FDA certainly coming a long way, employing a lot of really smart people in this space to help review these submissions. But there are confines. Words you don't want to say to FDA are black box. That does not go over well, right? That's going to generate a lot of additional information requests. So will we get there? Possibly. Are we there yet? No. But if you do want to take a look at what's on the market, FDA in the public domain, CDRH has a publication of every technology that has been cleared, granted, or approved with artificial intelligence. And so you can actually dive right in, take a look at those summaries and see what their indications for use are. Is there another question?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this. This is David from Wakekeefer. The question I have is, as AI continues to kind of sprout up everywhere, and obviously the governance is starting to come through. My general wonder is, how do you guys think about maybe if there are certain discrepancies across the different AI and maybe different AI systems, and how they maybe assess the same medical data or clinical data? Maybe they have a different recommendation, right? Or a different conclusion. Just kind of more open-ended, but I'm just curious, how are you guys thinking about that, as we think about all the different new AI data players and whatnot?
I mean, I think you're right to think about it that way. If you have an AI solution, is it going to behave the same, or Gen AI the same way with the next patient, right? So it is something, a problem and something to be aware of.
There are two companies that are working with AI-powered solutions to aid in the diagnosis of PTSD. One I mentioned is Sensei, that looks at eye tracking, and the other is Kintsugi. And then there are more. There is a race for this. There's a blood test for PTSD for a company called Polaris Genomics. But for those two AI-powered solutions, I would imagine when both of them get FDA clear, the ones with the highest sensitivity and specificity, I would imagine a clinical community theoretically would adopt that solution, and the market maybe would determine which one a clinician would use. But I'm not a clinician. That's my assumption.
Well, if it's if it's a predictive model identifying patient, you can evaluate, its accuracy, and you can compare them against each other in a way that you can compare, just any other multivariate, regression model. The generative AI just becomes harder. That's where I'm kind of stuck on what is like a metric other than surveying the users on how they like one versus another. But yeah, you can add. I've seen demos in which hallucinations, fabrications can occur, but you use the same interaction and it doesn't occur. It's hard when something is not consistently occurring with some of these models. You don't understand why. So yeah, generative AI is just a lot harder, I think, to evaluate and compare.
And Kwame, you said something that you'll see repeated on many clearances: to aid in the diagnosis of, right? So there is, for most technology, never say all, but the physician is involved and should be able independently to either validate or verify or confirm or refute the findings or the recommendations. We see a lot of AI in clinical decision support, triaging, things of that nature, which I think is incredibly helpful, especially with the level of overburden that our healthcare providers face. So as long as it stays within the aid in the diagnosis
Right.
And message inbox. I mean, the applications, I think right now, trying to use it for the efficiencies and also just that support, I think is really helpful. And from what I hear from health systems, folks are getting pretty good at utilizing Gen AI for
things like prioritization for Invesca. I am heartened. The history of clinical decision support in the 60s or 70s, people really try to implement models for diagnosis, and they all did not work that well. And that led to what's kind of referred to as the dark age of clinical decision support. People sort of abandoned the field because that turns out to be, they try to tackle the hardest problem with kind of the most primitive tools they had. So I'm actually heartened that people are moving back into this field because people avoided it for a long time because of the lack of success for so long.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Thank you all so much for serving on this panel and sharing your insights. I would love each of you just to leave a parting word with regard to AI, optimism, pessimism, kind of your wish for the audience as we think about bringing these new technologies forth.
Optimism, but also we have so many challenges to solve, right, in healthcare. So we do need to lever all of the tools and really work through these. And I think the approaches that are happening right now are the right ones. I'm also super excited. I know this isn't a life sciences panel, but just so much opportunity there. So I'm excited, and I kind of wish maybe I was back in college. And I think there's a lot of choices for folks here to really make an impact.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. I used to think that, boy, it's really hard to train all these end users what machine learning is, but I don't think that's really necessary anymore. That it's just as long as there's trust involved. It's like when you drive a car under red and the engine light goes on. Do you really need to understand why that happened? You just need a simple alert to tell you what to do. And I think that something like that is possible.
I'm optimistic because I've been fortunate enough to right now work with companies that are pre-revenue, pre-company at Washington University, all the way to ones that are doing de novo studies and of course the ones that are in market. So there's a rich pipeline, and I think the key word in addition to optimism is patience. It's a long journey, and you just have to be along for a multi-year ride.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for joining us today on this panel.
Thanks, Jeff.